Most of the suffering is in our minds, and very little in reality. From all the things that I've learned so far in terms of neuroscience and the understanding of one's mind, we haven't figured out what consciousness is.
What happens when we die? It's a question that humanity has wrestled with throughout history.
By my experience, consciousness has to be understood as experience, and there is only experience, including your sense of self and that narrow idea of just being in your head that can be just right away destroyed. Learn to notice what you are. Right now, you are where you need to be. It's just a matter of perspective.
Hello, Miguel, and welcome to Existentia. Thank you so much for accepting this invitation and for giving us your time and expertise. So today we are going to talk about concepts as yoga and meditation, consciousness and non-duality. We would like to start by asking you, who was Miguel as a kid? What were your dreams? And how does this align with the person you are right now?
Wow. That is a beautiful opportunity to try to rethink myself. Well, being really as honest as I can be here, I do not remember that Miguel that well. I mean, I know it was different from this one for sure, but I really don't remember if there was a particular dream, if there was a particular tone to my experience back then. I do remember that photo has a beautiful detail behind it. I had to cut it because there were other kids there, but there is an elephant in the back. And I always had this special relation with elephants. That's the zoo in Lisbon. And so there was a dream somehow to be closer to nature and animals, and that was captivating for me in many senses. So I know that openness and relation to the environment was already there. And I treasured a lot behaving well. So I was one of those kids that was doing what they could to just be on that side of things, just behaving. So being good was something that was, I remember that was important for me, doing things rightly and taking care of people, and probably that defined many things in my path along the life, because I always remember coming back to that idea, how can I be good? It's a very simplistic thing.
And who is Miguel right now?
Wow, yeah, always a big challenge. Now choosing from the many stories that have been coming together to my experience of being right now. I am at my house, so I feel above all a member of this community in this part of the world. That is important for me, a father, a partner, and that doesn't define what is the aspect of the inside, but it does place that story in a context, being in Santa Cruz, an active part of this community. So a father that is engaged with the education of their children, and a human being that more and more is trying to live a life that feels worth living and meaningful in many sense. I'll have to go to the things I do probably to continue that story, because it's very difficult to say what I am without using those references. So I spend most of my time outdoors, walking in nature with people, and also in beautiful places teaching yoga and practices like meditation and pranayama, breathworks. I'm engaged with many projects here that distill from being a member of this community and feeling the responsibility as a parent. So I engage with the school, I engage with a local community of people in a local association, trying to do things mostly with families. So Miguel is someone that is inclined to work with kids and families as this functional aspect of society, this little organism. I love to work inspiring people to be more close to nature, to themselves. Miguel is a mixture of all of what happens when I do these things.
So we know that you have a background as a doctor, and we would like to explore what made you change path from being a doctor to a yoga teacher, and what was the turning point that made you leave your medical career to pursue more spiritual path?
Yeah, spiritual is a charged word, so I'll leave that for now. Yes, I didn't mention that because my experience of being right now as Miguel has less and less to do with that moment of my life where I really was working as a doctor. Now, coming back with your first question and that little Miguel and thinking just being good and doing good stuff, I know that was important for me. So medical studies seem like a nice way to be a good human being, and gladly I always had the possibility to do that. I had good grades in school, probably because I wanted to behave. So it kind of felt natural to go there. I don't have any references in the family as doctors, or I don't come from a family that has doctors on it. And so I was pulled to that path. I really don't know exactly why, but probably had to do with that, the possibility of going there and the willingness to do good. But then, of course, I didn't know anything about the world, and I know a little bit more now, but I still don't know so much. But back then, I was really, really a little prince living his enchanted life in Lisbon, a privileged life in many senses. So I had no real contact with the way things were being dealt with in the world. And when I entered medicine, I also entered the university. I met a lot of people. I had many different experiences. I traveled, I met people. So throughout the years, studying medicine was difficult for me. Not because I couldn't be up for the exams, but because I was not so happy or aligned with the way that they were addressing health. And so doing good became something much more complex, as I was saying before. And society, to my eyes, it just really became something much more serious and complex. And so I started thinking of myself as a citizen of the world. I wanted to travel, I wanted to do things. I wanted to try many sports, many different experiences. And medicine lost a little bit of its track on me, but I did finish my studies. So as I was starting to work, there was always that on the back of my mind that I could do other things, not really knowing what to do. But it felt like the way that I was being educated to be a doctor and the way that I was expected to work in the future was really not so aligned with what I was understanding myself to be and the possibilities that I was seeing in the world and the things that were needing somehow my attention, or they were calling my attention. So I worked a few years, and I had to wait for the right conditions, the right partner, the right setting, the right moment for my personal development to get the courage to kind of move out of that without really knowing where I was going. And I tend to say this out as a joke, but I do feel this. I just decided to improvise. So I don't want this doesn't feel right. I don't want to continue on this path. I want to try other things. I think that I can work health in a different way. I think that I can understand health in a different way. I think I can be more healthy if I'm not here. So all of those reflections that they were in a confluence back then, they really pushed me to this improvisation that I still feel I am doing today. I'm kind of improvising the path forward. It seemed much more straight and clear back then that I was to become a GP, a general practitioner, and to work as such. And of course, in the way, there are beautiful things that happen because of that. By no means I regret that. I am standing here as a human being happy with its life and its journey because of that. I'm so sure of that. But I do feel that my role in the field of health is more to promote contexts of health. So it's just kind of to create a context to inspire, to work myself and share it with others. What can be health promotion? Not so much thinking of diseases, but thinking of how to use this health potential that we all have when we are born, or most of us have when we are born, and how to use that for a fulfilling, enriching life that means not only not having diseases, not being sick, is something else, right? It's this energy to be able to live and to enjoy life. And so my improvisation is kind of bringing that to my life with all the challenges it has, with all the difficulties and the suffering along with it. But I wouldn't go back in that path for sure. I want to keep on in this improvisation. Feels good, feels sincere.
Speaking about science and how this helped you in your path, can you tell us how do you balance science and spirituality in your everyday life?
Okay, so I will answer that. I love that question, but I will need to define spirituality for me. Out of a better way, I've been talking about spirituality as that which is beyond knowledge. And of course, we can be talking about many spiritual traditions and categorize them and use logic to understand many of the concepts of spirituality. But when I talk about spirituality for myself, is that transcends, let's say, reason, that which transcends my capacity to understand and talk about. So that field I am very interested in, personal experience of that, and I call that spirituality. It comes from breathing, so it's something of an experience. So, of course, you are opposing that with science, which is the standard for working with reason, right? So they seem like in two different spectrums. So they are always in a permanent tension in my life. But it's a good tension. It's that of a fertile place, just like when we're talking about ecology, and you have those margin places where an ecosystem meets another one, and they are always so abundant. So that's the case for me. Just having science coming and having a way to think and a way to react to the world and navigate the world with tools that come from science, come from my training, come from my way of being since I am a child, always trying to understand things and always trying to think of things, and then having the possibility of just on one hand dropping all of that and being in experience, on the other hand being a person that communicates spirituality, and because of all the challenges that has, just bringing the tools of science and kind of finding something in the middle to use to be both pragmatic, instrumental to help people navigate, as I do help myself navigate in these fields and trying to make sense of these things that are so difficult to talk about, and also to understand that from all the possibilities in our lives, there are paths that have been studied, that have been, in a way, proven, which I'm always afraid of saying that, because tomorrow we can prove the proof was not the proof. But still, to have something to work with the level of communication with today's world, where science is very important, right? And just to bring that to advance the way that we live in this world. And so I am a fan of science with the limitations it has. We are quite a lot, and what can work for you individually is very different from the responsibility that people have to talk to the collective, right? So these measurements, knowing that things need to be individual in action, but there is a reflection that we need to do about lifestyle and choices that need to kind of be framed in a more broader spectrum. And for that, science, I believe, it's really useful to give us a clue of how to navigate that mystery, to know what we eat, right? Or to think better about what we eat, how to navigate, for example, the environmental issues of our time, right? How to navigate this exploration of the self as well as a starting point, giving reasons sometimes for people to sit and meditate. Just self-exploration is too much of a confusion and too much of a strange subject for someone. If you just say that they can rest better, they can manage their stress, that they can live a more fulfilling life, and you have something to give them in terms of studies and things like that. And it's just the starting point. And I like the way that medicine, healthcare in general in the last years has been opening to these more traditional knowledges sometimes, especially if we consider meditation and yoga being the subject here of my spirituality, if you want to associate some words to it in a way, and Buddhism as well, and the way that science has opened to those ancient traditions and has found value from them and has been trying to test with the same tools they test, for example, drugs, or interventions of many fields, and just trying to use those things to integrate that into healthcare. So I'm very interested in that. But again, not so much as to fix problems, which can be a perspective, and sometimes it is useful, to stress management, for example, but also as just an opportunity for creating that context for health. It's a very beautiful tension there, and it's unresolved. Sometimes I see that as a dance, it's just two partners dancing and the music is playing and you really never know where you're going next, right? It's not like a mechanic thing, so you kind of have to keep on moving with it, and sometimes you step on the foot of the other, and sometimes you have to readjust, and sometimes it feels beautiful and you're flowing. So that's what I see.
What was the book that has changed the way you see the world? And what was the big learning about this book?
It's The Joy of Living. I believe that's the English name. I read it in Portuguese, but I think that's the name, from Miguel Contreras. I'm never sure how to say that name. It's a difficult one for me. He would be annoyed probably hearing me saying this, but he's a superstar among monks. He's a very gifted, very smart human being that knows or understands our society, 21st century society, but really comes from a lineage of very important lamas in Tibet and Dzogchen meditation traditions. So I had no idea of Buddhism back then when I read that book, and that was a revelation for me. He really does try to bring some of the science about meditation, and we're talking 13 or 14, 15 years ago, so a lot has changed. But he really wanted to show that there is a meeting between science and neuroscience specifically, and what is happening in meditation practices. So he was one of those first monks that got into functional RAMs, got all the wires, and they were trying to figure out what was happening in his brain. For me, it was fascinating because during my years studying as a doctor, nobody taught me about that. And really nobody just mentioned that in any moment as that being something important. And for me, it was so powerful that I could sit and that I could do something that was improving my health, that could even solve some of the mental issues, some of the mental problems that I was suffering myself, and so many others around me. But personally, I was really, because of all those challenges of being in a trajectory that I was not so happy to be in, I was suffering quite a lot from that. And so the book was an open door to a field that now feels as one of the most important ones in my life. Again, this tension, this meeting between science and spirituality. And it gave me a lot of tools, it gave me a lot of tips for deepening my meditation practice. And it did felt back then like a lever in my life. And the book's name, The Joy of Living, really sticked with me, It was really a defining moment in my life, maybe out of so many other things, but I do associate it with the book, that I just somehow I managed to access much more joy that I was feeling, got much healthier. That's what I feel with my mind. Probably because I started practicing meditation regularly, and still to the day, I still practice it almost every day, if not every day, and sometimes. But it's just it's a beautiful piece. It has so many cool metaphors. He's a really fun writer as well. So he brings metaphors from Matrix and like technological things. I recommend it to everyone that likes this. Yeah.
And what were the main differences between those two meditations, the Buddhist one and the Hinduist one?
You put me in a difficult position there, because Buddhism meditation doesn't point you to one direction. So just like yoga meditation doesn't point you to one direction. That's why I was avoiding the details. But in the way that I read this difference, right, in the way that it has been my experience as being a practitioner of yoga, being taught to practice yoga, and also being taught to practice meditation from a Buddhism perspective, in the classic yoga tradition, which is the one that I was more close to and still are, meditation has this long journey where you learn to withdraw from the senses and then focus your mind and then be observed by the objects that you're focusing in. That has a progression all the way to samadhi, enlightenment. So pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, right? Samyama. So it's a path, 4 parts of the Eightfold Path of Patanjali. And so I was being trained to kind of ignore everything, turn to that, focus on that. When you get lost, just narrow, okay? It's that narrow type of attention, focus. And so it always feels like you have your whole life ahead of you, and probably you will never get to that place, the meditation place of just being observed in the objects, because your mind just doesn't stop, and that's what presents to you. So you kind of spend more and more time in that, and it can feel very good. It can feel very good to be focused, but it can also feel very frustrating. And I had a relation with the guru, right, the teacher, that was always ahead in the way. He was like always so far from me, and I have to make my maths of how many hours of meditation I need to get somewhere there. And what Mingyur Rinpoche brought me with that book, and what I have learned from there, at least in one side of Buddhist meditation, is that right now you are where you need to be. It's just a matter of perspective. And you have to practice that perspective and that being able to recognize that. But it's right here. The Guru, just as much as you, and I hope that I'm not being disrespectful or anyone, is just able to access that because you are that. And so it really changed the way that I practice, brought much more kindness to the way that I was observing my mind, brought many dangers as well, just being lost and not understanding that. So you have to train attention as well, and there are many nuances to this. But the big difference in my contact with these two realities is that one is built on adding, so you can get someday to that. And the other one is just learn to notice what you are instead of just achieving that. And that feels much more powerful. That feels much more sincere with my experience right now. And that doesn't mean that the path of just learning to train your attention is not important. I do think that stabilizing the mind is really important for that. And I'm still a young trainee in that field. By no means I want to be an authority to this. I am really testing that. But it has put a lot of kindness and brought me to a place where I can communicate this with people much more easily. Because the other path seemed like you had to give up much more. It felt different. It felt that you had to just dedicate much more to that. And the life, the things that we enjoy in life seemed from a different place and seemed like they were against that path. And now I can integrate just being a father and a householder and a human being that likes to dance and likes to open a bottle of wine and integrate that into that experience of self-recognition and what I come to call meditation. Yes.
So you bring both meditation styles into your practice and into your teachings?
If you go to my practices, right away, we have to train our attention, right? It's just the starting point. But without considering that we have to spend all of our lives to get somewhere. We can kind of work in between both, being very kind. It's a shift of the way or the tendencies in our mind, and you have to practice that. I think it's Sam Harris that, from the Waking Up app, that uses these images, like that perspective that I know that exists in Buddhism as well. They tend to associate that with dualistic practice, and for example, those silent retreats and that insight type of practice sometimes is associated by some people with that, which I don't have so much experience in that, but I like this image of using rubbing two sticks to make fire, right? And you just keep on rubbing until one day you enlighten, right? Keep on rubbing. The problem is that if you stop rubbing, they cool off, and it's like, you have to go again. So the metaphor for me, and it has all these limitations, we can talk about that and all the pitfalls that exist in this. So by no means I see it as a perfect and complete, but it does touch my heart, and that's where I'm talking from here, which is that metaphor from the wave that is traveling in the ocean, right? And wants to find the ocean. The wave that is just moving from beach to beach, breaking here, breaking there, being pulled there, pulled out by the wind, just searching for the ocean. And then suddenly there is this moment, right? This moment you are taught to see that, oh, I am the ocean. And then it's just resting in it. And of course you can be so used to travel and search that you go back to that the next moment. You forget. But there is always the possibility of you just recognizing, oh, and you can imagine, right? You can make a little exercise. You close your eyes, you imagine a wave, it's moving, and it's just energy, a pattern of energy, and suddenly she realizes. And what does she need to do? It's absolutely nothing. That's the beautiful thing. Drop everything you want to do, and whoa, I am here. I am this. And so I see that as a contrast, and I'm not capturing being comprehensive in any way. There are practices in yoga from the Advaita tradition that seem a lot like this. You have so many different types of Buddhist practice that I really don't know, so I don't want to kind of generalize. But that is my experience of these two approaches. Yes.
In your view, what is the meaning of suffering, and why is it important for human existence?
Oh, well. Yesterday I wrote a meaningful quote for this moment from Seneca, a Roman philosopher. He was born in Spain. And he said something in the lines of, most of suffering is in our minds, and very little in reality. I think that's what I read. Probably he wrote something else, but that was what came to me. And in a way, it doesn't answer your question. I don't know where suffering comes from. Again, my scientific structure makes me talk about nerves and talk about pain and talk about gut feelings and things like that come from our biology and our evolutionary steps to survive. And so kind of things that we don't want, and we thrive moving to things that we like, and suffering somehow is a signal of things that you should avoid. But of course, when we talk about our society, talking about the 21st century, there is so much unnecessary suffering. That's my perspective. All of us in our lives, we have so much unnecessary suffering. And so I come back to Seneca. And the meaning of that thing that's just here on our minds is the way that we see things. So probably some suffering is necessary. It's part of existence as animals, as living creatures. Maybe most of our suffering is unnecessary. So if we could be more close to that perspective, probably, and that has been the case for my life, I've been suffering less and less from not feeding many of the inner conversations that enhance that sense of suffering. But I do suffer if I see my children suffering, and I suffer if I just think of so many things that are ongoing on the world. So it's also that, right? It's not just the survival, it's it's just a kind of a necessary side of liking, enjoying being connected with as well. I imagine it needs not to be like that, but talking again from my experience, it does cause me suffering.
Now we would like to get into the chapter of non-duality and consciousness. We would like you to explore the concept of non-duality, how this concept challenges the traditional understanding of self. And we would like to ask you how you define consciousness. Where do you believe it originates from?
And by no means I am a specialist on the many perspectives that exist on this subject and the many texts of reference. So duality again can mean many things, and in the West here we have an idea of duality that is built on the Western philosophies, from Greeks to Romans, and then continuing all the way to people like Descartes, and this concept of us in the mind being different of the body. That's one perspective on duality that has impacted a lot the way that we see the world, and valuing a lot the intellectual in relation to the material, the way that we from that create an image about human beings in the world, because we do have this intellect and other animals don't, and the material world is there as an extension of ourselves sometimes for that purpose. But that is one way that we tend to talk about duality in the West context. In India, in the traditions of what people call the classic yoga, some people call classic yoga to that which reference the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. Patanjali, this mysterious author of the Yoga Sutras, presents a worldview that was around in India that distilled from Samkhya, which is understood to be a dualistic philosophy. In that dualistic philosophy, the mind and the body, they are part of the same side of reality. Being a dualistic, there are two, of course. That same side where the mind and the body are receives the name of Prakriti. And Prakriti, we would translate it today more appropriately as nature and everything it contains, both the material things of nature and the subtle aspects of nature. Now, to touch the term you use, Purusha, Purusha tends to be translated as consciousness, the other side of reality, that which is not material, that which is not prone to quality or movement or change. So, of course, we cannot break these down very simply, but just to give you an idea that that is the dualistic framing of the old tradition of yoga. And so in a way, Purusha, consciousness, is wrapped around in Prakriti. And sometimes I talk about this as the sun casting light onto planets. And so the solar system is kind of going around the sun. And if the sun doesn't have a fellow sun to talk with him, if he has always existed as the sun, and the only thing he knows to do is to cast light onto things, then it wouldn't be so strange for our mind to imagine that the sun doesn't know that he exists, because the only thing that he does is to cast light. And because there is no solar system mirror size that he can see himself upon, then all of what is seen is what he casts his light upon. So he sees the planets moving and the moons and everything. So Prakriti is that movement, the subtle and the more dense. And from this perspective, the way that I see it, Purusha is trapped on this illusion, on what the tradition describes as avidya, ignorance. He thinks he is what he's shining upon. So the goal of yoga, in a way, in that particular framing of the classic tradition, is to recognize yourself as the sun. So noticing that there is Prakriti, that is moving, changing our bodies, our minds, all these thoughts, my breath, this relation to things. But there is also Purusha. Notice that there are two aspects of reality, so one doesn't exclude the other, they both exist. But you are not the light you're casting onto. You are the source of light, the sun. So basically turning to yourself. And it has a specific method. And Samkhya was doing that by logic, reason. They were thinking about how Prakriti came to be, and they were trying to do logically the steps back to come back to Purusha. In yoga, they use this methodological approach with asana and pranayama and a lot of meditation to clear the body, to stabilize the mind, so you can understand yourself. That is one perspective, and you will find many others, but that is one way to define the duality in this classic tradition. Non-duality, which I have found more commonly spoken in Buddhism, but it's very clear in the Advaita tradition of India, which I am by no means a specialist in, but in the Dzogchen tradition, for example, from Kangyur Mingyur Rinpoche, what I get from that is that it is assumed that what exists is consciousness. So all of the things that arise are just modifications of consciousness. You could think of that as a dream. Sometimes people put it like that, right? Just a dream doesn't exist outside of what is dreaming of it. And so, in a way, it's just the possibility of having transformations of the same thing, and that expression, just returning to the idea that there is only one thing. Now, the most common thing that happens when using a dualistic framing, and now let's not think so much about how I was explaining the dualism in yoga, but just thinking more of an experience, a human subjective experience, when closing the eyes, for example, and feeling their breath, is that we relate to the breath as the ones that are observing the breath. So that distance between the breath and me on this side, noticing the breath, can also be understood as a dualistic perspective. So here I am, and there is the breath, right? So again, back to the sun and the planets. And so that perception has on itself many traps, and I will not go into great length on that, but it does keep us distant from things, and it does keep on feeding a perception that we exist in our minds, for example. Here in between the ears, the forehead, and the back of the head, because most of us, we associate that observer of the breath here. Our non-dual practice is to stop recognizing yourself as the observer of experience, the witness. That's how they comment the Yoga Sutras, being the witness and that which is witnessed, right? So not to identify yourself as the witness, but to recognize that you are experience. And there is only experience. and including your sense of self, and that narrow conversation or that narrow idea of just being in your head that can be just right away destroyed. We can we don't exist in our heads as little beings there, right? Just it's very relieving in a way. It just opens a path for an honest experience of self, my perspective. And by no means I want to be disrespectful for all the other philosophies that I don't understand so well, and probably that I misunderstood sometimes, but that's how it lands on my side. So being experience as a unified field of consciousness, and that is one where you can really make that sense of self that creates the distance with the world kind of disappear. It's not a magic trick. I believe that to be a very honest, not a trick, but a very honest perspective onto oneself. And probably is my bet, and the limitations of the experiences I had in my life just make me think life to be coming out of that. But it does feel important.
What advice you would give to someone who is just starting meditation or yoga and just feels overwhelmed? Can you give us concrete advices for people to live a meaningful life, more healthier and happy?
I would say that the starting point is honestly, sincerely understand how your mind works. And that is not a conceptual understanding that I'm calling for. It is just to sit and ask your mind, for example, to stay focused on the flame of a candle and see what happens, and recognize that. And that is the starting point, just recognize that most of the times, for all of us, we do not control our mind. Things come to the mind, we don't know where they come from. They come, they go, they disappear, they move, they bring all these images and thoughts and things like that. And then there is this possibility of just coming back to the flame, and all these subtle aspects and undertones of emotional experience, some things that are on the back of our minds, and just to spend time noticing that. And from there, probably you need guidance. Probably you don't do the path on your own. Some people have done, but in my case, it wouldn't be possible without teachers. It wouldn't be possible without people helping me to take that direction. So we can use words to take directions. They cannot translate experience, right? They can only point you to. That's why in the tradition of Buddhism, so many times you hear about pointing instructions. They give you directions, and then it's experience. And so I wouldn't risk trying to give just anyone like a clear path, because I'm really not qualified to do that. I can, yes, guide you in some practices using words that do give direction to experience, that try in a way to just cut through that tendency to think that we are different from the things that we are recognizing, and kind of to open to a more spacious way of being, which is not one that feels that it's doing that much, but that feels that it's just existing. But again, every time I use a word, it just traps me. So I'm very aware of that, knowing that I have to use them. We can use science, and by no means I am an expert again on that, so I don't have like the names of the studies or in the tip of my mind. I don't. When I prepare certain courses or classes, I can use them specifically, but right now I can just generalize. But I can tell you that from all the things that I've learned so far in terms of neuroscience and the understanding of one's mind, we haven't figured out what consciousness is. Depends on how you define it, of course, But as that subjective experience, we don't really know exactly what is responsible for that in the brain, and there is a serious possibility that we will never find that. And that's a very interesting subject, because there are limitations to the tools we use in science right now, and probably always. We don't know how it would be if we resist 1,000 years more and how science will look by then. But right now, people like Antonio Damasio, the Portuguese neuroscientist, is in the tip of the spear in some senses, right? Studying the brain and understanding the brain and consciousness and identity. We have so much knowledge about the default mode network and how we focus and what is attention and so forth. But consciousness, I've never heard the scientists saying, "No, I know what that is," and kind of matching the different neural pathways and just making a beautiful framing of how consciousness arises in the mind when you put a person in a RAM. Look, consciousness is there. I've never seen that. And so it remains mysterious. We'll go back to the poetry. We'll go back to the non-conceptual. By my experience, consciousness has to be understood as experience, and we can talk about it, but it is accessible. Maybe it is what we are. Maybe it is what everything is, like some people believe. I will keep everything in question marks, because I can freely say I don't know. But it does feel that you can access that mysterious being, which is not a different being than you are. It's just being here, being what it is right now, beyond the stories, beyond the attempts to explain. So I'm not helping the one that is trying to get into this conversation, or just getting him or her very confused. But I mean, these are complex subjects, as you said, to talk about, and that's why some traditions, they are very careful in the way they talk about these things. They don't want to bring all the confusion right away. So probably I'm not doing any right in just pressing this too far. But as you know, when I teach it in the yoga context, we do have a practical support for this, and we do invite people to access experience. But we talk about this. Yeah, that's the tension.
Now, stepping into the future, what are the biggest challenges that humanity will face, and how can spirituality guide us through them?
Yeah, I have no idea. I will throw some words. Artificial intelligence, disconnection from nature, loss of community, environmental degradation. Yes, just capitalism and the whole story of money defining so much of our life in this possible paradise. Coming back to my children and the way that they are educated in a collective society, we have responsibility with one another. And I do see that in this spiritual realm, so much is spoken out of just the mind, or just the willing to impress, or just these beliefs they were not thoroughly just kind of explored. And that you see how these people so many times change in their life of beliefs. We all do, but it's just, this is the truth, and this is the truth, and next year is that, and yeah, it's a lot of that, the simplification, I think, and not being able to openly be in that space of unknownness. It has to do with self-knowledge. It has to do about understanding oneself. And of course that then transforms our lives. But it can be for the sake of just knowing. It can be for just realizing what you are. And out of that, then, of course, you will live differently. Out of that exploration.